On June 7th, in Bristol, England, the statue of slave trader Edward Colston was pulled down by protesters, and then they threw it in the river.
That was spontaneous. I literally didn't know it had happened until someone showed me a video of it going into the river. Someone was live streaming it. There was actually about 10K plus people there.
Bristol was at one point in the 1700s a leading slave port during the transatlantic slave trade, which is how Colston made the bulk of his fortune. He donated much of this money to charities in Bristol and other parts of England, which then led to the naming of streets, a music hall, a girls' school, and a statue after him.
To symbolize the slave trade, they tied his legs and arms, even though it was a statue, and threw him in the river, the same river that used to bring in slaves into Bristol, so it was kind of symbolic.
The word Colston is so divisive in this city, whether or not you're black or white. He was a slave trader who made his money off the back of human lives.
Videos of the statue's fall and drowning were recognized worldwide and even mentioned at George Floyd's funeral.
All over the world, I've seen grandchildren of slave masters tearing down slave master statue over in England and put it in the river.
I am not condoning criminal damage, but I won't pretend that the statue wasn't offensive, and to walk around that statue, to have it in the middle of the city with a plaque on it that talks about a wise and virtuous son of the city when he made his money from kidnapping, from death, from that kind of exploitation, was very hard.
Statues of slave traders and colonialists in Europe and Confederate statues in the United States, in addition to statues of Christopher Columbus, have increasingly become targets of protesters during the aftermath of George Floyd's death.
It's a park dedicated to white supremacy. It's a park dedicated to indigenous genocide.
After these protests, the UK has started removing some of its statues that have ties to slavery, but some, like Winston Churchill and George Washington, are being boarded up to protect them from being vandalized. In the United States, Virginia's governor announced plans to remove the monument of Confederate General Robert E. Lee.
That statue has been there for a long time, but it was wrong then, and it is wrong now. So I am directing the Department of General Services to remove the statue of Robert E. Lee as soon as possible. But make no mistake, removing a symbol is important, but it's only a step. We still need change in this country. We need healing, most of all.
Just days later, the move was blocked by a judge, but Northam's administration remains committed to removing it.
Robert Lee, who was a slave owner who fought a war that killed hundreds of thousands of people to defend the institution of slavery, and even if he was a loser, he is represented in those statues with a totally different image that is the image of someone who won the war.
There's also debate around renaming streets and schools that were named after Lee. And in addition to the statue of Lee, Richmond, Virginia's Monument Avenue also contains other statues of men who defended the Confederacy.
Most of the Confederate monuments were constructed then in the 20th century, early 20th century, at the summit of the period of Jim Crow, and to display to African Americans that they should continue in a position of submission. They symbolize then this very long history of slavery, colonialism, white supremacy, and racism.
Public spaces were built up around these statues, making them inescapable.
It led to this beautiful street filled with really ugly symbols. And the fact that the street was in many ways wide and gracious and lined with trees and a place that people like to gather made those symbols even more pernicious, because they embedded those symbols in the daily lives of people who lived in that city. That inescapability becomes kind of toxic.
This is a coming home moment to see that down there. Every day I went to Bowles and had to come and see that park statue in this park and be reminded of the racial hatred. Black Lives Matter this morning. Black Lives Matter. Thank you, Jesus.
It's an ongoing oppression. They were put up to perpetuate the racism that had made it possible for that slavery to exist in the first place. So I don't know what that does to somebody who is is a person of color, but I can only imagine that it must make every single inch of the public forum feel somehow a little less welcoming than it is for somebody who's not a person of color.
I feel like they want that part of history to be consistently in our minds, when obviously we must have had a life before slavery, we must have had a life before colonization, and that specific part of history being so prominent in this country, it reduces me as a person and reduces my identity.
We see now statues honoring Martin Luther King, Frederick Douglass, and so on, but it was not the case if you take 30 years ago.
Araujo believes that those in support of these statues must come to terms with their own history, and that heritage does not mean condoning past atrocities.
We have those individuals who are even willing to carry weapons to go and defend a statue. Individuals who claim some kind of connection with that heritage associated with the Civil War or the veterans of the Civil War. And heritage, when it is bad, we need to come to terms with it. If we remove them, we are not erasing any history. The history is written.
For many, there's the question of what to do with that empty space once a statue is removed.
And you can do things with an empty plinth. You can put new art on an empty plinth. You can invite artists to come in and do something for 6 months or for a year. We can leave it open. We can have it as green space.
Many recommend putting these statues in a museum, but Araujo points out one problem with that.
The problem with the United States is that there are too many Confederate monuments. We're talking about hundreds and hundreds of monuments. Many museums, they do not have the place. Perhaps they would have the place for one monument, but not for 10 or 15.
The statue of Edward Colston was fished out of the water on June 11th. The Bristol City Council said it would be taken to a secure location before being placed in a museum.
The idea of never seeing it again on the streets of Bristol brings me joy, really. I don't want what happened on Sunday to be the end of it. I want the conversation to keep going. I want it to stay that way until Black lives do matter.